I hide I'm gay at work. Until my boss saw me at the gay bar. Hey my dear friends. Today, I'm gonna share a story that flipped my life upside down and made my heart race. Get comfy, grab some coffee or tea, and let's go on this journey together. It's gonna be thrilling, I promise. My name's David Clark, I'm 28, and I work as a project coordinator at a small marketing firm in San Antonio, Texas. My job is all about juggling task lists, meeting with clients, and replying to emails late into the night. I've always kept my personal life under wraps, especially at work. Being gay in an office feels like balancing on the edge of a cliff. Nobody needs to know, so things stay calm and predictable. But everything changed when Nathan Reed joined our firm. Nathan became our manager 3 months ago. He's 35 tall, with neatly styled dark hair and a gaze that seems to see right through you. He doesn't raise his voice, but his words always carry weight. Colleagues either admired him or tried to stay out of his way. I just did my job, keeping a low profile. Nathan felt like someone you couldn't let down, and I liked that. I was comfortable as long as nobody pried into my life. But last Friday, things took an unexpected turn. I went to Arcade, a gay bar in downtown San Antonio, to hang out with friends. It's a place where I can let loose, dance, and forget about work. There, I'm just David, not a coordinator drowning in deadlines. I never imagined anyone from the office would spot me there. But on Monday morning, Nathan called me into his office. I walked in, and my heart pounded like I was late for a big meeting. He was sitting at his desk, holding a coffee mug, and pointed to the chair across from him. "David, were you at Arcade on Friday night?" he asked, looking straight into my eyes. His voice was steady, but there was a slight spark I couldn't quite place. I froze, trying not to show panic. How did he know? Maybe a mutual friend spilled the beans? I nodded, doing my best to seem confident. "Yeah, I was meeting some friends," I said, hoping my voice didn't waver. Nathan gave a small smile, and it wasn't his usual professional one. It was warm, almost trusting. "Nice spot," he said, sipping his coffee and leaning back in his chair. "I just didn't know you went there." My cheeks flushed. He knew I was gay, and it was clear from his look. But there was no judgment in his tone, just something like curiosity. I shrugged, trying to hide my unease. "It's not work-related," I said, staring down at my hands. "Of course," he replied, but his eyes kept studying me. "Just wanted to say you're doing great work. I don't want you to feel awkward." I nodded and left, but inside I was spinning. Nathan knew my secret, and his words, his look, they felt too personal. I couldn't stop thinking this was the start of something bigger. After that talk in Nathan's office, I went back to my desk, but my thoughts were tangled like wires in an old computer. I tried focusing on spreadsheets and emails, but every time the office door opened, I glanced up, half expecting to see him. Nathan knew my secret, and it left me exposed, but his warm look stuck in my mind. I couldn't tell if it was just curiosity or something deeper. The workday dragged on, and I tried acting normal, but something inside me had shifted. The next day, Nathan started reaching out to me more. He used to send tasks through email, but now he'd stop by my desk to discuss project details. His voice was as steady as ever, but I noticed him holding my gaze a bit longer than necessary. During a morning meeting, he asked me to clarify a client's timeline. I answered, and he nodded, but his eyes seemed to say something else. It was subtle, but I felt a warmth in my chest, like someone had flipped on a light in a dark room. By midweek, we were working on a new project for a big client from Houston. Nathan tasked me with drafting a presentation, and we spent a lot of time going over it in the conference room. That Thursday, we stayed late, reviewing slides on the big screen. The office was nearly empty, with only the hum of the air conditioner breaking the silence. Nathan sat close, his elbow almost brushing mine as we flipped through notes. I tried focusing on the numbers, but his presence was distracting. When he pointed at a slide, his fingers grazed my hand. It was accidental, but my heart jumped like I'd touched a live wire. "We need more specifics here," he said, eyes on the screen, but his voice was softer than usual. "Can you add a couple of examples?" I nodded, jotting down his feedback, but my mind was elsewhere. His shirt was slightly unbuttoned at the collar, and I noticed a faint tan line on his neck. I snapped myself out of it. I couldn't think about my boss like that. But in that moment, I couldn't ignore how he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. It wasn't obvious, but it was enough to make me wonder if he was hiding something too. By the end of the day, I stayed late to finish edits. Nathan came out of his office and paused at my desk. "Good work today, David," he said, giving a small smile. "Don't stay too late." I mumbled something back, but after he left, I realized I couldn't stop thinking about him. His words, his closeness, it all felt too real. I started wondering if I was imagining this tension between us or if it was actually there. By Friday, I couldn't pretend everything was normal anymore. Nathan filled my thoughts like a song I couldn't stop humming. His glances, the accidental touches, they were spinning in my head, but I kept telling myself to stay distant. We were working on the Houston client's presentation, and the deadline was breathing down our necks. Nathan decided we had to finish the draft by Monday, so that Friday evening, the office cleared out, and we stayed behind in the conference room, hunched over our laptops. The room's lights were dim, and only the projector's screen cast bluish glows on the walls. Nathan sat across from me, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and I tried not to notice how his fingers moved confidently across the keyboard. We were discussing slide layouts, but the conversation kept drifting to small things. He asked how I spent last weekend, and I asked if he liked the coffee from the local shop. It felt oddly normal but thrilling, like we were carefully testing boundaries. At one point, I reached for my folder, and my hand brushed against his. Our fingers touched, and I froze, feeling the warmth of his skin ripple through my wrist. Nathan didn't pull away right away, and for a second, I thought he felt it too. I looked up, and his gaze was soft, but there was something in it that made my heart race. "Sorry," I mumbled, pulling my hand back and pretending to focus on the screen. "No big deal," he said, his voice quieter than usual, almost intimate. "You tired? We've been at this for hours." I shook my head, though my eyes were burning from the long hours. Nathan leaned back in his chair and looked at me with a small smile. "You know, I have to keep some things private too," he said, staring off to the side, like he was weighing his words. "Not everything can be shared at work." I froze, unsure how to respond. Was he talking about his orientation? Or something else? I wanted to ask, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just nodded and he went on. "It's exhausting, isn't it? Always being on guard," he added, his gaze returning to me, warm and understanding. "Yeah," I breathed, feeling something shift between us. "Sometimes I just want to be myself." We sat in silence, and it was heavy but not awkward. I stared at his hands on the table, wondering what it'd be like to hold one. But then the conference room door creaked, and the janitor walked in with his cart. We both flinched, like we'd been caught doing something forbidden. Nathan quickly turned back to his laptop, and I started gathering my things. "Let's wrap this up tomorrow," he said, not looking at me. I nodded and left, but my chest was burning. Something was growing between us, and I didn't know how to stop it. The next week felt like walking a tightrope. Every glance from Nathan, every accidental touch in the conference room left a mark, like a warm imprint on my skin. I tried focusing on work, but thoughts of him flared up at the worst moments, while checking emails or grabbing coffee in the break room. The Houston client's presentation was nearly done, and Nathan suggested meeting outside the office to go over final edits. "Just coffee," he said, but his voice was too soft for it to be only about work. We met on Saturday morning at a small coffee shop in downtown San Antonio. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows, glinting off the wooden tables. Nathan was already there, sitting by the window with a mug in his hands. His shirt was unbuttoned at the top, and I couldn't help noticing how the light traced the line of his neck. He smiled when I sat across from him, and it wasn't his usual office smile. It was warm, almost inviting. We started talking about the presentation, but soon the conversation slipped into personal territory. He asked how I ended up in San Antonio, and I told him about moving from Austin for the job. Then he shared that he grew up in Dallas and always wanted more than a corporate life. The air between us thickened, like our words were just an excuse to stay close. Nathan leaned in a little, his elbows on the table, and I caught a faint whiff of his cologne, something woody with a hint of citrus. My fingers fidgeted with a napkin, and when I reached for my mug, our hands nearly brushed. He didn't pull back, and I noticed his gaze flicker to my lips, just for a moment, but it was enough to throw my breathing off. I tried listening to his words, but all I could think about was how close he was, how his knee under the table was almost touching mine. "David," he said softly, his voice like a whisper meant only for me. "I don't want to pretend nothing's happening. You feel it too, don't you?" I froze, my heart pounding so loud I thought he might hear it. His eyes were serious, but there was a vulnerability I hadn't expected. I wanted to say something clever, but I just nodded. "This isn't just work for me," he went on, his fingers tightening slightly on his mug. "I can't stop thinking about you." My cheeks burned, and I looked away, scared he'd see how much his words hit me. I knew this was dangerous. He's my boss, and it could all fall apart in a second. But in that moment, under his gaze, I felt alive. "We have to be careful," I finally managed, but my voice shook. Nathan nodded, but his hand slid slowly across the table, and his fingertips barely grazed mine. It was a light, almost weightless touch, but it burned through me like a spark. I left the coffee shop feeling like I'd crossed a line, and I wasn't sure I wanted to step back. After the coffee shop, I felt like the world was brighter and riskier all at once. Nathan was everywhere. In my thoughts, in stolen glances across the office, in the warmth of his voice when he asked me to stay after a meeting. I tried keeping myself in check, but every time he passed my desk, I noticed how his shirt hugged his shoulders or how his fingers adjusted his tie. It was torture because I knew I shouldn't think that way, but I couldn't stop. But someone in the office was starting to notice more than I wanted. Lindsay Morgan, my coworker in marketing, was always friendly but way too nosy. The day after the coffee shop, she cornered me in the break room while I poured coffee. Her eyes sparkled like she was holding onto a secret. "David, you and Nathan have been spending a lot of time together," she said, stirring sugar into her mug. "Something interesting going on?" I nearly spilled my coffee, trying to keep my face neutral. Her tone was light, but I sensed a trap. I shrugged, mumbling something about the presentation, but Lindsay just grinned wider. "Just noticed how he looks at you," she added, leaning in a bit closer. "It's not exactly boss-like, you know." My cheeks burned, and I changed the subject fast, but her words stuck with me. If Lindsay noticed, could others? Panic started creeping in, imagining rumors spreading through the office, threatening my job and whatever was starting with Nathan. That night, I met my friend Evan at a bar on the outskirts of San Antonio. Evan was always a good listener, and I spilled everything about Nathan, the coffee shop, his touch. "You're falling for him," Evan said, sipping his beer and eyeing me with a smile. "And it's scaring the hell out of you, isn't it?" I sighed, picking at the label on my bottle. He was right. Nathan stirred feelings I'd avoided for years. I wanted him, not just his smile or voice, but the warmth of his skin, the closeness I felt when he leaned toward me in the coffee shop. I imagined his fingers tracing my wrist, slower than before, his breath brushing my neck. Those thoughts were too vivid, too real, and I pushed them away, afraid they'd pull me in too deep. "Be honest with yourself," Evan said, his voice turning serious. "If you want him, don't hide. But be careful, he's your boss." I knew he was right, but the fear of rumors and losing my job weighed on me. The next day, I decided to talk to Nathan. I caught him at the end of the workday as he left his office. He looked tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. We stood in the empty hallway, and I noticed his lips part slightly, like he wanted to say something big. I stepped closer, feeling the heat of his body, and my fingers tightened on my bag strap. "We need to talk," I said, my voice lower than I expected. Nathan nodded, and his hand brushed my elbow, lingering for a fraction of a second. It was subtle, but my body reacted like he'd run a finger across my skin. I knew this conversation would change everything. After our hallway talk, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and stepping forward was inevitable. Nathan suggested I come to his place on Saturday to discuss strategy for the Houston client. I knew it was just an excuse, but I agreed anyway, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. His apartment was in a quiet San Antonio neighborhood, in an old brick building with big windows. When I walked in, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the warm glow of lamps created an instant coziness, but the tension between us was almost tangible. Nathan greeted me in jeans and a plain white t-shirt that softly hugged his chest, outlining the shape of his shoulders. He looked relaxed, but his gaze, as he handed me a coffee mug, was as piercing as ever in the office. We sat on the couch, and I noticed how close he positioned himself. Our knees nearly touched, and I could feel the heat of his body even through my shirt. We started talking about work, but the words felt like background noise as I tried not to focus on how his fingers tapped his mug or how his lips glistened slightly after a sip of coffee. The conversation drifted to personal stuff. Nathan shared about his life in Dallas, how he always felt out of place in the corporate world. I opened up about my fear of being myself at work, and he nodded like he knew that feeling better than anyone. At some point, he set his mug on the table and turned to me, his knee now pressing against mine, and that slight pressure sent a wave of warmth through me. "David, I don't want to hide anymore," he said softly, his voice low, almost husky, and it stole my breath. "You make me want to be honest." I looked into his eyes, and there was such openness that I felt exposed. My fingers trembled as I set my mug next to his, and our hands brushed. This time, he didn't pull away. He gently squeezed my fingers, and it was like a spark that shot from my palm to my chest. I noticed his breathing deepen slightly, his chest rising slowly under his t-shirt. I wanted to move closer, to feel his warmth, but fear still held me back. "I want that too," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Nathan leaned in a little, and I caught the faint scent of his skin, mixed with coffee. His hand slid slowly to my shoulder, fingers softly gripping the fabric of my shirt, and that touch was so intimate my body reacted instantly. We didn't go further, but we sat there late into the night, talking until we fell asleep on the couch, his hand still resting on my shoulder. When I woke up, I knew that night had changed everything, and I couldn't pretend nothing was happening anymore. The morning after that night at Nathan's felt like waking up in a new world, where everything seemed possible but fragile. I stirred on his couch, feeling the warmth of his body next to me. Nathan was still asleep, his hand resting on my shoulder, his breath softly brushing my neck. His t-shirt had ridden up slightly, exposing a strip of skin above his jeans, and I couldn't tear my eyes away, my heart racing at the sight. I eased myself up, trying not to wake him, but he stirred, his eyes fluttering open. His morning smile was so soft it sent warmth spreading through my chest. "Morning," he said, his voice husky as he rubbed his eyes and shifted closer. His knee pressed against my thigh, and that small contact felt like a spark igniting my skin. I mumbled something back, but my thoughts scrambled as I took in his tousled hair and the faint stubble on his jaw. We sat in silence, the air between us charged like before a storm. Nathan reached out to brush a strand of hair from my forehead, and his fingers lingered on my cheek, warm and slightly rough. The touch was so intimate I held my breath, a rush of desire stirring inside me that I'd been trying to suppress. I wanted to lean closer, to feel his lips, but the fear of consequences held me back. We drank coffee, trying to talk about work, but every glance from him felt like an invitation that set my body on fire. When I got ready to leave, Nathan walked me to the door. He stood so close I could feel the heat of his chest, and his hand brushed my waist, like he didn't want to let go. "See you at the office," he said, his voice lower than usual, his eyes flickering to my lips for a moment. I nodded and left, but I couldn't shake that morning from my mind all day. At the office, things seemed normal, but our connection was more noticeable. Nathan lingered at my desk more, and his fingers sometimes grazed mine when he handed me papers. Those fleeting touches were like a secret we shared alone. But Lindsay, as always, didn't miss a thing. During lunch, she caught me in the hallway. "David, were you at Nathan's this weekend?" she asked with a sly smile. "I saw you two leaving together on Friday." My cheeks flushed, and I muttered something about work, but her look said she wasn't buying it. Panic crept back. If Lindsay noticed, rumors could spread. I found Nathan in his office after lunch and told him what she said. He listened, his brow furrowing, then stepped toward me, closing the door. "We need to be more careful," he said, but his hand slid to my elbow, fingers lightly squeezing my skin, sending a wave of heat through me. I nodded, but all I could think about was how close he stood, how his breath nearly brushed my face. We agreed to keep our distance at work, but I knew that would be harder than it sounded. By the start of the next week, I felt like I was living a double life. At the office, I was David, the project coordinator checking spreadsheets and answering emails, but inside, I was burning with thoughts of Nathan. His presence was like a magnet. Every time he entered a room, I couldn't help watching how his fingers adjusted his shirt sleeve or how his lips curved slightly when he read my notes. We tried being careful after Lindsay's comment, but it was like trying to hold water in your hands. Our eyes met too often, and each time, I felt my body respond to his nearness, like he was touching me without even trying. On Wednesday, we had the presentation for the Houston client, and the office buzzed with tension. I helped Nathan with last-minute edits, and we spent the morning in the conference room, sitting so close I could feel the warmth of his shoulder through my shirt. When he leaned to point at a slide, his elbow brushed mine, and I noticed his breathing deepened slightly, like he was fighting himself too. I tried focusing on the numbers, but all I could think about was how his fingers might slide along my arm, slow and deliberate, leaving heat on my skin. During the presentation, Nathan commanded the room, his voice steady, but he suddenly turned to me and publicly praised my work, calling me a key player. The room clapped, but I felt colleagues' eyes, especially Lindsay's, zero in on me. Her smile was too knowing, and I knew rumors were starting to spread. After the presentation, I stayed late to pack up, but my thoughts were a mess. Nathan found me in the empty conference room, his shirt slightly unbuttoned, and I couldn't miss how his chest rose with deep breaths. "You were amazing today," he said, stepping closer, his voice low and warm, like it was just for me. I wanted to reply, but he moved even closer and I could feel his heat, his scent, a mix of cologne and something purely him. My fingers gripped the table's edge as he looked at me, and I saw his gaze flicker to my lips, lingering for a split second. I knew it was crazy, but my body leaned toward him, like it had a mind of its own. "We can't do this here," I whispered, but my voice shook with want. "Then come with me," he said, and his hand touched mine, fingers lacing together for a moment, sending heat through me. We left the office and headed to a small park near San Antonio. The evening was warm, and we found a secluded spot behind tall trees. There, in the shadows, Nathan turned to me, and his hand slid to my cheek. His fingers were warm, and my breath hitched as he leaned in. Our lips met, soft but so intense the world vanished. It was our first kiss, full of risk and truth, and I knew I didn't want to hide anymore. But here's the shocker. When we pulled back, Nathan looked into my eyes and said he'd quit the firm if it meant we could be together. I froze, not expecting that. He was ready to risk his career for me. What would you do in my shoes? Drop a comment below. How would you handle love clashing with your job? And what's more important, career or feelings? Share your thoughts, I'm dying to know.